Hi. Hi, I'm Raina Gilead, and this is episode 17 of the Lester Leadership Series. This series explores AEC industry trends, diversity, equity, and inclusion while highlighting the voices and leaders of the industry. Today, I have the honor of interviewing someone who is an industry leader in transportation and who also went to middle school with the founder of Lester National, Rob Lester, a dear friend of the family, Ben Tripousis. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Raina. Happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to give the people a little bit more info about who you are.
Mhm.
So Ben has served as Associate Vice President and San Jose Office Group Director with HNTB, a national architecture and engineering firm, for over 4 years, where he is working in the South Bay on a range of infrastructure projects. These projects include the Capitol Corridor South Bay Connect Rail Project, the US 101 Berryessa Mayberry Interchange Improvement Project, BART to Silicon Valley Phase 2, and the California High-Speed Rail Project. Prior to joining HNTB, Ben served as the National California Regional Director of the California High-Speed Rail Authority and was responsible for the development of the California High-Speed Rail Project in Northern California. Huge project. This includes the electrification of the Caltrain Peninsula Corridor Project, environmental clearance of the San Francisco to Merced project segment, and the future high-speed rail connection to Sacramento. In addition, Ben oversaw the development of regional rail improvements to the Capitol Corridor, Altamont Commuter Express, ACE, and the San Joaquin Regional Rail Systems. Ben has also served as an adjunct professor at San Jose State University, teaching high-speed rail management and operations in the Master of Transportation Systems Management program, and has served as the director of the High-Speed Rail Connectivity Center at the Mineta Transportation Institute. Previously, Ben served as Transportation Policy Manager for the City of San Jose, serving as the city's liaison to all local and regional transportation agencies, where he helped craft regional planning and funding policies for the 100 cities and 9 counties in the Bay Area, and helped lead the development of long-range transportation policies for Santa Clara County. Ben is a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley and has
Go
a
Bears.
master's. I know, go Bears, exactly. We're a university, Berkeley family as well. So, and has a master's degree in public administration from San Jose State University. So thank you once again, Ben, for being here.
My pleasure, Raina. Thanks again for the opportunity to chat. Love talking about transportation and how much more there is to do.
Yes, but also how much has been done. You have
Yeah.
such an extensive career and experience in transportation. So again, it's great that you're here and we can kind of pick your brain on a couple of things. So the first thing is, you've dedicated much of your career, as we said, and life to transportation, the transportation industry. And some would say that transportation is the great equalizer, providing rides for those who don't have a car or maybe can't drive. Having access to an affordable, reliable form of transportation can mean the difference between isolation and opportunity. So the first question I wanted to ask was, why did you choose transportation as your career purpose?
Well, in many ways, transportation chose me. As you mentioned, my career began really in public policy. When I first got out of Cal, I had every intention of going to law school. And so I went to work for a San Francisco law firm for a few years. And the longer I worked there, the more I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. So needed to find something else. Excuse me. And when I was at Cal, I was interested both in the law and in politics. And excuse me, in my senior year at Cal, I got an internship with a San Francisco law firm that was also very active in local politics. And so spent a lot of time working on local campaigns, worked on a couple of supervisorial campaigns in San Francisco while I worked for, or interned rather, for this law firm during my senior year, because the lead attorney at the firm was very active in San Francisco Democratic politics. So that started my connection to the policy side of things. And then when I decided I wanted to go to law school, worked for a San Francisco firm for a few years, wasn't as active politically, but when I finally realized that it was time to move on to something else, that the law really wasn't going to be where I was going to focus my energies, I decided to go to work. Actually, I was just going to volunteer initially for the Michael Dukakis presidential campaign. I'm of Greek descent. Dukakis is Greek, and so I felt the connection there, and I felt like I just wanted to participate in the campaign. And long story short, I ended up getting a job as a paid organizer on the Dukakis campaign in 1988, and was one of the organizers in the East Bay for the Dukakis campaign. And those of us that worked on the campaign like to say that the operation was a success, but the patient died. It didn't work out quite the way we wanted, but it was a great experience, worked with a lot of great people, got an opportunity to meet a lot of great people. And that really led me to the beginning of my policy and ultimately transportation connection. Out of the Dukakis campaign, I went to work for a member of the state legislature, sadly, who we just lost, former Assemblywoman and State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Delane Easton. I was Delane's district director we were based in Fremont, but we had part of the East Bay and part of the South Bay, part of San Jose and Milpitas, represented them in the legislature for 7 years. And then we got Delane elected state schools chief. And then I'd also, after having worked for Delane, I went to work for a member of Congress and did that for 2 years. And after I did that, I went to work for a member of the San Jose City Council, which is how I got to the transportation job that you mentioned in San Jose. And how it came to transportation was that with each of the policymakers that I'd worked for, I just by default almost became their lead transportation policy staffer. So I, through that effort, was able to build a network of contacts in the transportation industry, whether it was part of self-help county leadership with the traffic authority here in Santa Clara County, for example, which was the first sales tax in California devoted exclusively to transportation. So the first, what they call self-help counties. It was followed by a measure in Alameda County that we also represented a portion of, so got involved with that transportation measure and its passage and ultimate implementation. So I began to build a pretty solid network of transportation contacts, and the issue just became interesting to me. I just liked transportation as an issue, and through the contacts that I'd established in transportation, began to gravitate more and more to the kinds of work that we do in transportation. So that's what led me to the city of San Jose. There was a planning job, essentially a policy and planning job with the city of San Jose. And I was able to land that in 1998 and did that for 15 years. And in that capacity, served as the city of San Jose's point person on the California high-speed rail project. And we got engaged in high-speed rail really at the outset of the high-speed rail authority as it's currently constructed or currently organized. In 1996, what had been called the California High-Speed Rail Commission, which determined the feasibility of high-speed rail in California and really came to the conclusion that high-speed rail was a viable alternative for transportation and transit in California, and that we should pursue the development of a high-speed rail project, European-like, Asian-like high-speed rail, fully engaged 200 plus mile an hour high-speed rail system did make sense for California. It then shifted to the High-Speed Rail Authority as it's currently constituted, and then the development of the ballot measure in 1998 that was the foundation of Proposition 1A, the $9.95 billion that was the first injection of funding for the current high-speed rail segment that's being developed in the Central Valley between Merced, and Bakersfield. So while I was with the city of San Jose, I was the liaison between the city and the high-speed rail project itself. We worked very hard and advocated vigorously to make sure that the alignment of the high-speed rail project came to San Jose first, that it connected from the Central Valley through the Pacheco Pass as opposed to the Altamont Pass, which was one of the other alternatives that was being considered, because we wanted to be sure that the city of San Jose, the largest city in Northern California, was in fact the gateway to the Bay Area, not just a spur line, if you will, for the main system. So we wanted to make sure that it came through Pacheco into downtown San Jose, and we were successful in doing that and have been working with the project ever since. And then from my work with the city of San Jose is how I landed the Northern California regional director job with the project, because I really love the project. I've always believed in the project. It's always been near and dear to my heart, and having had the opportunity to work on it was tremendous, and a great learning experience, and just a great opportunity to make a difference in moving transportation forward in California.
Yeah, amazing. Wow. It's so interesting how, again, I find people, they start on this track and this path, which then really leads you to your ultimate, path.
Yeah, if you would have told me this is what I would be doing for a career when I was in college, I would have laughed at you. What do I know about transportation? And as I like to say, even today, you don't want me designing a bridge or a railway system or a light rail system, but I can get one built for you. And that's the career that I've been able to carve out. And too often people don't understand that that's the opportunity that an industry like transportation really offers you. If you've got solid leadership skills, if I can speak, and the ability to communicate with people and bring people together and build coalitions and relationships in support of a particular outcome, you can be successful in transportation. You don't necessarily have to be an engineer. Now, being an engineer is helpful. It informs the work that you do, but so much of the work that helps deliver transportation project is people work. It's about, as I say, building relationships and advocating on behalf of a project with elected officials and leadership at all levels. And in these days of term limits, you don't have the kinds of leadership in place at the local level, at the state level, even at the national level to an extent, where an elected official can support a BART to San Jose project or a light rail project in a particular city or a bridge project, some significant infrastructure project that's going to take many years to fund and ultimately deliver. It used to be before term limits, you could, if you were in office and you believed in the project, you had an advocate in that position for this particular project. People like Rod Dearden, who was a former member of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, who really was the father of light rail in Santa Clara County. He marshaled that project through because he spent over 20 years in office and could really work deliberately and consistently with funding authorities and the legislature and the governor's office and federal advocates in support of getting the revenue and ultimately the construction of a light rail project like that takes many years through. You don't have the opportunity to do that, at least not at the elected level. You don't have advocates who can see a project like that all the way through. They can take portions of it. They can certainly do it for a certain amount of time, and they can do it through multiple offices if they move from city council to state legislature, maybe onto Congress. But having one advocate who diligently supports a project doesn't happen as much anymore. So it makes it much more difficult to maintain the support and the momentum for a large infrastructure project to get it funded. And it also doesn't help that it takes a lot longer and costs a lot more than it used to get these projects done. So that makes it even more challenging.
I can only imagine, because even just buying butter is a lot more expensive than it used to be. So we're talking about a whole other expanse of the budget and, and financial organization. So You answered a little bit of my next question, but I kind of want to dig deeper into it because we talked a lot about, again, starting your career in politics. I know that, again, there is a people person aspect to politics that I would assume also, as we just discussed, is a very important aspect in transportation.
Yeah.
So how did your earlier career help shape what you do now?
It toughened me up. It gave me a little thicker skin because as Deb will tell you, I have a pretty, I'm pretty emotional and I have a pretty thin skin, and I tend to take things personally. So my political experience helped prepare me for certainly the high-speed rail experience, where as the Northern California Regional Director, I was the point person, especially when we started the environmental review of the project. I was the point person on the project and would be delivering the message to city councils and members of the legislature and communities on a regular basis about what the project was that we were environmentally clearing, what the potential impacts of this project was going to be on the respective communities that the project was going through, what that meant for the local community, how the local community could engage, what kinds of mitigations we could provide for the local community. And all of that was really about standing in the front of the room and explaining the importance of the project to each community. And it was literally retail politics. It was door to door. It couldn't be just a rote, here's our project, we're environmentally clearing it, just live with it. It was really about building connections with people, that communities in California in generally, and in the Bay Area in particular, and it's, I'm sure, true in LA and San Diego and other parts of the state, but certainly in the Bay Area, we have a highly educated, highly engaged, and thoughtful community. Mm-hmm. And communities along the alignment of high-speed rail had a lot to say about high-speed rail. And one of the many challenges of trying to develop a system like high-speed rail is that it's not a small improvement. It is a significant, impactful infrastructure improvement. And trying to shoehorn a project like that into an already fully developed community where we've done a really poor job of maintaining rail rights of way in particular. We don't have a lot of space around the rail lines that are currently in place, largely because as a state that's fiscalized land use, where every city is trying to develop every square inch of every city and town in the state to generate revenue to operate that city, they tend to buy up the right of way right up to the edge of the existing rail line. So that doesn't give you a lot of room to add additional rail lines, or if you do, you end up having significant impacts because you're buying up right away, you're relocating homes and businesses, and that has a profound impact on the local community. So to your question, the politics really gave me a foundation with which to go to those community meetings and be prepared for the onslaught of the community concerns that were going to come naturally from the impacts of a very large infrastructure project coming into that community, and trying to build coalitions with members of the community and trying to make the case with the community that the benefits of the project greatly outweigh the impacts, that we were committed as a state agency related to high-speed rail to mitigating as many of the impacts as we possibly could around the project, trying to ensure that if there were impacts, that they would be minimal in nature and that we could address people's specific concerns, whether it was help relocating their business or reducing the impacts on residential neighborhoods or not impacting communities of color and reducing the environmental justice and economic justice impacts of a transportation project. We didn't want to be Robert Moses in New York, where you just put a freeway through and divide a community forever and prevent people from going to the grocery store down the block that they used to go to for the last 20 years because you put a freeway in their way. You can't get there anymore. So we tried very hard to be sensitive to those kinds of impacts. The environmental process in California, the California Environmental Quality Act, and as well as the National Environmental Protection Act, require a greater sensitivity to those kinds of issues than we did in the past. So we had a very clear mission on what we had to do, but it still required building relationships in each community. So my political background helped prepare me for going door to door and doing the kinds of planning and creating the kinds of, having the kinds of conversations with local communities and residents that tried to explain the project, that tried to invite them into the development of the project so that we were doing it together. I was always very concerned about people in communities feeling like we were doing it to them, that this project was being foisted on them and that they were just going to have to deal with it, that I had to make the case that the project was in the best interests of the entire state of California. And while there were going to be local impacts, we were going to do everything we could to minimize those impacts in the name of the greater good. That bringing high-speed rail was part of the puzzle in improving transit and transportation for everyone, not just for a few people who were going to ride this very fast train.
Right, right. And I think, you know, with these sort of projects, there are so many different factors to consider. And exactly, I'm glad that you mentioned that about the public and, you know, them not feeling like this is being done to them, but that you're working with the community in order to hear their needs and, you know, that they're a part of understanding the process. So that being one aspect, I know that also with transportation, there are many stakeholders. That's a whole other sort of, you know, group of people to keep in mind and, you know, stay involved in the process. So how do you manage and align all the many stakeholders? And also, like, what particular challenges, if any, have you faced aligning all stakeholders?
Well, for me, first and foremost, you have to be not brutally, but candidly honest with them. You've got to be straight with them. The minute they feel like you're just saying what they want to hear, you lose them. And it's going to be very difficult to get them back. You've got to be honest with them. As I said, you've got to invite them into the process. They've got to feel like they've had a meaningful conversation, that they've meaningfully been heard, that they feel like their concerns have been vetted reasonably. While you may not be able to address all of their concerns or positively respond to all of their concerns, that they at least have registered them and feel like they are part of the conversation, and that you are willing to get to a place where you can work together on a solution that's a compromise that works. That's really where you've got to land first and foremost. You've got to make sure, if not necessarily getting them to feel like the solutions that you're arriving at are their idea, at least ensuring that they're feeling like they're part of the process. Because again, we're trying to foist this very large project on largely built out communities. It's not all greenfield that we're putting this project in the midst of. And even there, even those areas, say in the Northern California section between Gilroy and the Central Valley, where it is largely greenfield and new construction and new tracks and new tunnels and the like, there are significant impacts to wildlife and migration patterns and waterways and water resources that you're going to affect, that you've meaningfully have to address, that you've got to talk to ranchers and farmers and help them understand what the impacts of having a train here are going to be. You need to talk to cattle ranchers and dairymen who are concerned about the impacts of the train noise on their cows' ability to provide milk. And that's their livelihood. That's their living. You've got to make sure that you're holding them harmless from the impacts of this infrastructure project. So there's a nuance that has to be incorporated in all of the outreach and engagement that you're doing on a project like this, because there are so many elements that you're unaware of, even if you plan really effectively for engaging communities around a project like this. One of the things that I was taken to using when I was leading the high-speed rail project was I didn't know how much I didn't know. That the depth and breadth of the impacts of a project like this were far greater than anyone really could have anticipated before you dive in and begin to understand the kinds of businesses you're impacting, the kinds of people you're impacting, the kinds of communities you're impacting, and in what ways you're impacting them, and trying to find there is no one best way. So you've got to tailor your project development around all of these very discrete impacts.
Right. Wow. That's, again, it's so many different facets and aspects and things to consider. So it really, but I love that idea of I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's, and I would assume that a lot of times on these, with each project, you're learning something new, or you may be able to take some knowledge from the last project, but there can be something else where, again, you're faced with, oh, I didn't know what I didn't know,
Yeah.
So you're learning also as you're going and sort of tackling each different aspect that comes up. And I'm learning the word dairyman. I didn't even know that was what you call I'm a city girl. I'm like, dairyman, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. That milk comes from somewhere. So
comes from somewhere. Well, and all, but I like that you also said, again, thinking environmentally, we are so, well, not all of us, but some of us are very conditioned to just think about the human experience. And it's like, we're sharing this planet with other species and beings. And again, you're thinking of migration patterns and, just how these different infrastructures affect the animal and wildlife. So I'm glad that you brought that up too.
There are actually two stories on that score. There are multiple, but two that really have always stuck out in my mind, related around migrating waterfowl and a herd of elk in between the city of Gilroy and the city of Merced. There's a lot of grasslands and marshlands and flyways for migrating waterfowl. And birds, sadly, don't know anything about overhead electric wires and the kinds of tracks and systems that are necessary to operate a 200 plus mile an hour high-speed rail system. So there was a strong likelihood that in this particular migration pattern, north and south, that the high-speed rail line was going to be crossing from an east to west standpoint, that a lot of these birds would decide to land on the overhead catenary, which is electrified and a really bad idea for anybody to land on. So we had to find a way to shelter these waterfowl from hitting the lines or landing on the lines and being killed. So our engineering team was able to come up with what they loosely call or refer to a bird tube, which is really a cover on the elevated or at grade portion of the alignment through Pacheco Path, the piece that's outside of the tunnel. There's about 13.5 miles of tunnel at various points between Gilroy and Merced, but a lot of it is still elevated or just at grade, but open air. So in that stretch where the waterfowl migrated, they essentially put a cover over the rail line, the length of that migratory pattern, to prevent the birds from landing on the overhead catenary. It still allows the train to function efficiently, but holds the birds harmless. In that same section, there's an elevated portion of the guideway that goes into connecting with the Central Valley line, and there's a substantial herd of elk that migrates north and south in that section. And largely because of how large their horns become, elk are very sensitive to crossing under things. So the elevated guideway had to be sufficiently high so the elk wouldn't be deterred from crossing underneath it, that they felt like they knew they could clear this elevated structure, but it had to be high enough to do that. Otherwise, it would have stifled their migration and impacted the ability of the herd to maintain itself and grow. So again, things like that that you wouldn't ordinarily think about unless you do a deep dive and are confronted by the realities of what exists in that particular area. You can't just tear on through and put a train and hope for the best. There are a lot of very subtle impacts that you need to address, and being able to be flexible and thoughtful about those sorts of things, try and be proactive, try and do as much planning in advance as you can before you get into environmental clearance and construction really makes a big difference in your ability to deliver a project like that.
Yeah, and making sure that you have the right people with the right knowledge on your team.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So I would love to know, because there's so many different elements of this, but it's always fun to know like what stands out to the people who do this work. So for you, like what has been the most gratifying aspect of your work, would you say?
Those moments where I've been able to turn people around, where you get out into the community and you are confronted by a hard no, that no and heck no, you're never going to get this thing built through my neighborhood, through our town, through our community. And you're able to work with them on a regular basis and get to that compromise level, that you're able to successfully achieve an outcome that works for them and for the project you're trying to deliver, that you're able to establish relationships where they can trust you, that you've dealt in good faith with these folks and built relationships with these community members, that provides them with a comfort level that they know that you're taking their interests into account, that you're not just focused on the project, that you're not just focused on the outcome, that you're trying to be a good steward of taxpayer funds. You can't just provide all the resources that any particular community would need as a result of the impacts that stem from a project like this, but you invite them into the process, you work with them diligently over time, and you're able to get at a solution where they feel like they've been heard and they feel like they're getting a result that works for them and their community, that they can live with for many years, because this project's going to be there for many years, and that results in a project that minimizes the impact, certainly from a cost standpoint, on the development of a project like high-speed rail, and allows you to deliver the outcome that we've promised to the taxpayers of California. And it's those moments that I appreciate the most. And the other piece for me is really the academic side of it, that I have learned an enormous amount being able to engage in a project like high-speed rail and in transportation writ broadly. And when I was with the city of San Jose, for example, I was more of what I refer to as a utility infielder, being a baseball guy. I would do anything. I would take on those projects that nobody else wanted to do. So as a result, I found myself doing everything from trying to get regional funds that we could commit to pavement maintenance so we could fill potholes in the city of San Jose. City of San Jose has 2,400 miles of streets that needed to be paved on a regular basis. And we were always trying to play catch up in terms of having enough money to make sure that all the streets were paved. And so would work on that, learn more about pavement than I ever thought I would have cause to learn. The city of San Jose ended up organizing for 3 years running a Grand Prix, an IndyCar Grand Prix in downtown San Jose. So I ended up being one of the point people on planning the San Jose Grand Prix for 3 years in a row in the early aughts, and knew nothing about planning a IndyCar race, but worked with a team of people that allowed us to put together the infrastructure in downtown San Jose and the roadway that would allow Indy race cars to race through the streets for a race and put on a promotional event that was really meaningful from an economic standpoint to the city of San Jose, because having the race in town generated a lot of revenue, a lot of visitors, a lot of race aficionados and fans that came for the San Jose Grand Prix 3 years in a row, and it really made a difference for the city. But I would have had no cause to learn anything about putting together a race like that, but had the opportunity because I was engaged in transportation. So all manner of opportunities to just improve my own understanding and education and expand my learning and interest, just as a result of what we had to accomplish on the transportation side.
Wow. Wow. I think, one of the things that I really like about being able to do these interviews and have people with the kind of extensive knowledge that you provide is people get to sort of hear and understand different elements about this industry. Because I think, like, again, you don't know what you don't know, as you've already said. And people may think, I don't really think that the transportation industry has something that I'm going to be interested in. Well, what do you know about the transportation industry? That's the thing is, until you start to understand, oh my God, there's so many different elements to it. And then you say, oh, this really, now I can understand that this element really does suit me, and this one I'd be even more interested in understanding more about. So my question is, do you have advice for young people who are entering the workforce, who already may have a passion for working in your industry, but even those who may just not even know that there could be something that they could be passionate about in your industry?
I think in all of it, and having had the opportunity to work in transportation on both the public and the private side now, what really was the catalyst for me in transportation is the ability to leave the community in a better place than I found it. The ability to impact the place that I live and the region that I live in a meaningful long-term way. That the work that we do in transportation, whatever part of the work, whether it's in engineering and planning and environmental review, whatever part of a project or effort supporting transportation advances the ability to improve the condition of transportation services, as you said at the outset, the ability to connect communities, to allow low-income communities and workers access to resources that could get them to work, that could get them to school, that could allow them to do what they need to do on a daily basis, to connect communities, to make sure that you can get from San Jose to San Francisco without it taking 4 hours for you to get there, finding ways that you don't need to use a personal vehicle to make the same trip, that you can find ways to improve environmental conditions by reducing the need for single occupant vehicles and allowing a transit system that is interconnected and interoperable and allows people the opportunity to get off a bus and onto a train and onto a regional transportation system or to an airport to make a longer trip, that it really weaves the community together. And the understanding that your role in transportation, whatever it is, can help build that outcome, that can help develop a lasting impact on the community that you live in and benefit not just the agency or the company that you're working for, but the community at large. And that's really I think, ought to be a foundational principle in anybody's engagement in transportation, that it really is about making the place you live better. It's an opportunity to improve the conditions for the community that you live, and whether it's public or private, you are still improving the conditions of your community. And that's a huge value that I think is underplayed in transportation, that we always focus on the project or the funding or the ability to dominate a particular sector of transportation, whether it's structural or civil or any aspect of building our transportation system. It really, at its core, is about making the place you live in better. And that's what's always attracted me to it, and what's been at the core of the work that I've done both in the public and the private sector.
Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. Well, you have helped to improve this leadership series by allowing us to interview you. So, I mean, unless there's anything else you wanted to share or add, I mean, you've given us so much, but yeah.
I would just say the only thing that I would add is that we need more people. That transportation is too often a subject matter that people don't spend a lot of time thinking about their potential for engaging in the industry. That if you're not an engineer, whether it's mechanical or civil or any structural engineer, and have engineering as a focus, most people don't think they can get involved in transportation if they don't have that as a focus. And I'm here to tell you, there's room for a lot of non-engineer types in transportation. HNTB right now, for example, is a 6,500 person company nationwide. We have 73 offices around the country, and we're looking at adding another 1,500 people this year. We've got and that's just in our one company. There are multiple companies like Glusser and others who also have the same demands. We need good people to be engaged in the development of our transportation systems in an ongoing way. So getting people to understand that transportation isn't just about engineering, that it is has a much broader spectrum, and a need for a much broader spectrum of individuals to help deliver transportation projects, not the least of which is outreach and communications, and the ability to message transportation improvements and what those mean to local communities. So that's really what I'd offer as a takeaway, is that transportation is much bigger than people think, and has many more opportunities than people may imagine for their engagement, that can provide fulfilling careers and meaningful contributions for the communities that they live in.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Ben. This has been wonderful. And it's been a pleasure to have you, but also a pleasure to get all of this wonderful information and be able to share it to the rest of our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Raina. The pleasure's been mine. I appreciate the opportunity.